Have you ever heard a kick drum that's so unique, so unpredictable, so incredible that you've wanted to fight someone? That might sound a little intense, but that's exactly what happened when J Dilla was producing the song Runnin by the Pharcyde in 1995. Today we're talking all about Dilla, the story of the song Runnin, and digging deep to figure out why this kick drum caused a literal fistfight. But before we get to the kick drum, the fight, or the beat from Runnin, let's talk about the Pharcyde. The Pharcyde's first album, 1992's Bizarre Ride to the Pharcyde, is a hip-hop classic, but during the recording of the album, there was tension within the group. J Swift, who produced all but one of the tracks on the album, felt that he wasn't getting the proper credit or compensation for his work. He said that the other group members, Fatlip, Slim Kid Trey, Booty Brown, and Imani, were trying to claim production credit when he had done it all himself. This falling out with J Swift happened just before the completion of the first album. So when it came to recording their follow-up, 1995's Labcabincalifornia, strange name I know, the Pharcyde needed a new producer, and since their debut album had done well, they had some more pull. They were looking to work with Q-Tip. It's difficult to overstate Q-Tip's influence and importance to music in general. He was a member and producer of A Tribe Called Quest, and he's also produced for artists like Nas, Mobb Deep, Busta Rhymes, The Roots, and more. His production style has had a massive influence on a lot of people, including J Dilla, and I'm gonna have to talk about him more specifically in future videos. Anyway, the Pharcyde was trying to work with Q-Tip, but he was in demand. He explained to the guys in the Pharcyde that while he was too busy, he had a new kid that he had started working with who would be perfect. He played a few tracks off a beat tape for them and they loved it. It sounded a bit like Q-Tip, but different. He explained that the kid that made the tape was JD, based out of Detroit. Before he was J Dilla, he was known as JD. And also, Detroit wasn't nationally known for their hip-hop. After they left with the JD beat tape, Trey started to think about this new producer, and it didn't seem to add up. Okay, before I do this next bit, you need to know that Q-Tip's real name is Jonathan Davis, okay? Jonathan Davis. So Trey starts thinking to himself, Q-Tip says he's too busy, but check out this new producer that you probably never heard of. Where's he from? Detroit. Yeah, weird, I know, Detroit. His name? JD is his name? Yes, JD. That's like when your friend goes, hey, let me get the aux, I'm gonna show you something new. And it's clearly their new solo project. It's good, right? You hear it, right? It's good. What did you think of the vocal? Anyway, let's get back to the impending fisticuffs. Remember, the Pharcyde had tension in the group during the recording of the first album, and this time around, it was no different. After initial sessions, they flew JD out to LA to finish mixing the album. They were recording at a studio close to a house they all shared, dubbed the Lab Cabin in California. It's the name of the album. For the first album, things were tense, and apparently everyone thought they were a producer, enough to drive J Swift away. But now, some success, some money, some gear, everyone was a producer, had their own ideas of what they should do, and they're all living in the same house? Fight, 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 fight. So one day they're mixing this song called Runnin. JD had already made the beat. The primary sample on it is Saudade Vem Correndo by Stan Getz and Luis Bonfa from 1963. It's a 2-bar sample of gorgeous Brazilian guitar played by Luis Bonfa, pitched up slightly with some added percussion, scratches, and drums, including the infamous fight-worthy kick drum. But before we talk about the punches, let's talk about the kick. Wordplay. Hip-hop is built on sampling and loops, but this song is a little bit different. It takes looping to another level. The primary sample is that Stan Getz Luis Bonfa song, but it's just a 2-bar loop of guitar. That's fairly standard. You got 2 bars, maybe you got 4 bars, you're looping it for a long time. But let's look at the waveforms. So this top section right here is Runnin by the Pharcyde. I got the BPM set to 94 and it lines up pretty well, but if you zoom in, you're gonna see 2 things. For one, just look at where the kicks land. These waveforms right here are the kicks. I've of course reproduced these down here. Let's go over to this first one here and zoom in. It looks like this one's coming just a little bit early. I'm gonna zoom in on this one. It should be on beat 2, but it looks like we're a little bit late. The reason why it doesn't line up with the grid perfectly is because JD played this in by hand. He's trying to give it a more human feel. And in order to do that, it doesn't need to be exactly on the grid. And I need to make something perfectly clear. I think not playing on the grid is great. Sometimes it's called for, sometimes it's not. But I made a video all about Earth, Wind & Fire September, and we looked at the waveforms and I said it doesn't line up with the grid. And some people took that to mean that I think the Trolls version is better because it does line up with the grid. I'd never said that, I'm not saying that now. This is fantastic. So already we're not 100% lining up with the grid, but when you play the song as a whole, it might wander this way or that way a little bit, but it stays mostly centered. My previous analogy for this was a cake bundt pan. Imagine filling one with concrete and then turning that out, and then filling one with Jello and turning that out. It might wobble a little back and forth, but it's stable. That's this beat. The other thing we'll see here is the actual kick pattern. It's not just that it doesn't line up with the grid, it's that it doesn't repeat in a predictable way. We've got that guitar sample, which is a 2-bar loop, so we might expect the kick to also be a 2-bar loop. These blue waveforms here are the kicks, these green ones are the snares. So what I've done is gone through the track here, and anytime there's a kick here, I'll add another kick here. Anytime there's a snare, I'm adding the snare. If we look at the snares, totally predictable, on 2 and 4 all the way through. But if we look at the kicks, remember this is mostly lining up with the grid here. This is beat 1, this is beat 3, this is 1, and now we're not on beat 3 here. The kick pattern's different here. Okay, but that might repeat in the 3rd bar, let's see. No, it doesn't. What about the 4th bar? No! After that, no! We have no repeats. Let's play a snippet of just the kick and snare. This kick drum pattern is 20 bars long. That's crazy for 2 reasons. For one, it's very long, but for 2, because it's 20 bars long, the first time it plays over the chorus, it's one kick pattern, and the next time the chorus comes up, it's a completely different kick pattern. So the whole thing is looping, but as the song goes through, it remains unpredictable. A more conventional kick pattern is going to be 2 or 4 bars. It's going to stay exactly locked to the grid. This beat is not only not lined up with the grid, but because of the 20-bar loop, it doesn't feel like a loop at all. All of it's between the timings and the unpredictable kick patterns give it a more human feel. Feels like there's a human drummer playing it. And really, there is a human drummer playing it, he's just playing pads on an MPC. Now, you and I love this, and this is a classic example of Dilla's unique time feel, but it was so different from a typical beat that not everyone in the group loved it. To at least one member, who I'll mention in a moment, it sounded too chaotic. And actually, what we just looked at technically isn't even what they were listening to originally. Stay with me. That's because of the next part of this story. Remember, we've got brewing tensions in the group. They're all living in the same house. Their previous producer quit working with them. They couldn't get their first choice Q-Tip. And this new kid from Detroit comes in with a good beat, but the kick is all over the place. Literally. In the middle of the mixing process, everyone went out to grab some food. Everyone except Fatlip and the sound engineer. When they all came back from lunch, they played the track back, and Fatlip had changed the kick drum. Instead of the organic, loose, long 20-bar loop, he'd changed it to be more of a standard kick pattern. Trey demanded that Fatlip change the beat back to JD's original kick, since that was what made the beat unique. And also, that's straight up disrespectful to JD to change his beat while they're away for lunch. But it was too late. When he replaced it with his straightforward version, Fatlip had completely erased the original kick. After exchanging some words, Trey and Fatlip stepped out in the hallway to exchange punches. After years of tension in the group, personal egos, and everyone wanting to produce, it all came to a head with J Dilla's kick. It was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, but like an awesome, organic, unique 20-bar long piece of straw. I don't know, you get it. Dilla found the fight kind of funny because, yeah, it's just a beat. But we can look back on this now as a signature Dilla beat. This is a big deal, and as we'll see in a minute, it kind of altered the course of history. The fight between Fatlip and Trey was broken up by their manager, and Dilla offered to do the kick however they wanted. He was just happy to work with them. Trey insisted that Dilla re-record it exactly the way it originally was because it was perfect. It was Dilla's signature. And Trey was absolutely correct. So correct that... Okay, so in my video on the Soulquarians, I suggested that maybe the guy that gave Questlove the D'Angelo tape was a time traveler. Turns out he wasn't. Maybe it was Trey who was the time traveler, who was sent back in time from an alternate timeline where the Runnin beat had a more conventional kick drum. I don't know, there's a time traveler in here somewhere. Dilla re-recorded the kick, all 20 drunken bars of it, and they finished the track with no further drama. Then Runnin was released as the first single from Labcabincalifornia, peaking at number 55 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 6 on the Billboard Rap chart. It also charted in the UK, Scotland, and New Zealand. Dilla produced a total of 6 tracks for Labcabincalifornia, including the song Drop, the second single from the album, as well as Bullshit, which also has an unpredictable loose kick drum pattern. It was this song that first caught Questlove's ear when he heard the Pharcyde play After the Roots when they were touring together. Quick side note, do you remember the Star Wars movie Rogue One? It takes place right before the original Star Wars movie and leads right into it. Literally the last few seconds of Rogue One lead into the first few seconds of A New Hope. Well, this story, the story of J Dilla, Runnin, the Pharcyde, and the kick worth literally fighting for, is the Rogue One of the Soulquarians story. Here's the last few moments that connect it. Quest was blown away by the beat he heard, the kick, and how the whole thing felt loose and drunk sounding. For a long time, Questlove was determined to play his drums like a drum machine. absolutely accurate. But hearing this opened up new possibilities in his mind. After hearing a Dilla beat for the first time, Questlove asked the guys in the Pharcyde what song that was. They explained it was produced by JD, and they had actually already told him about it. A few weeks prior to this, Questlove was talking with the group because he had heard that they were going to be working with Q-Tip for the next album. They explained that it was actually going to be Q-Tip's new kid and pointed to JD sitting on a couch nearby. At that moment, Questlove was disappointed it wasn't Q-Tip and didn't really care enough to meet the new kid sitting on the couch. But fast forward just a few weeks. After hearing what this new kid could do, make something entirely unique with a kick and time feel that he'd never heard before, Questlove had a new mission. Not to sound like a drum machine, but to sound like JD, who he dubbed a music god. This would lead to the formation of the Soulquarians, teaming up Quest, Dilla, D'Angelo, James Poyser, Erykah Badu, Common, The Roots, and more. But for that story, you gotta watch this video.